Brilliant. So hello and welcome. This is Cognitive Sports Therapy Time to Talk. I know we've skipped a couple of weeks, actually. There was Easter holidays, but we've got a big topic today. We are going to talk about adolescent mental health, and I am really pleased to introduce James Roast. You might know him already. So he is Roast Clinical Services. When you look up his website, it's a lovely website. We haven't had that conversation, James, but I do like the website. And James and I connected through social media. It has its pros. I guess because of a shared passion to do with that sort of mind-body link, and I guess feeling like we could mutually help with some of the patients, clients that we were looking after, who were looking for that sort of joined up way of thinking between what we do physically and what we talk about with our sort of mental health. And yeah, no, it's been great to kind of have that connection with you, James. So thank you for kind of linking up with me. But I remember that initial conversation, and one of the first things I wanted to know from you was whether you had experience with adolescents. And I was really, really pleased when you said that you did, because certainly from what I'm seeing as a GP, if I put that hat on, pre-COVID, so this goes way back, and you're probably going to agree with me, is that I was always worried about adolescents, that my young people have been struggling for a long time, and then we've just hit them with COVID, and it just seems to have made things worse. Are you with me in that, or what, have you got anything you'd like to add or say something more about who you are and what you do, maybe?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me on, Claire. I'm delighted, and obviously since we connected, obviously the conversations have been very easy, and as you quite rightly say, I've got that shared passion, particularly in sort of child and adolescents and their mental health and well-being. So I've been in practice now for just over 14 years. I qualified in adult mental health and adult psychology, and then after around about 18 months, 2 years, I took specialism in child and adolescent work. The drivers behind that, and I won't go into too much detail, were the fact that there was this really it appeared to be quite a complicated and convoluted treatment system. I felt there must be a much simpler process to this. We all start life in the same place, essentially, and obviously are shaped by the environment. If I go back sort of 12, 14 years ago, there were obviously mental health issues and challenges, both mild, moderate and severe in children. And the numbers were relatively high. However, as you quite rightly say, as we both were concerned about and anticipated, can we say post-COVID phase? I don't know if we're post yet, but let's say this period. Yeah. I mean, the numbers are off the scale. I mean, seriously off the scale. So I spent 3.5 years on an inpatient unit, and obviously for 11 to 18-year-olds, and the complex mental health conditions of those children, as you can appreciate, were challenging. And then there was a big gulf between, what we'd consider to be, that could be contained, say, within the school environment, that we could have school counsellors or visiting practitioners come in and help those children during those developmental phases. Yeah. I think we've seen, I'm not going to lump all this at COVID. There's definitely been an increase, and it has exacerbated things. But I think environmentally, socially, the acceleration over the last 5 to 8 years has been astronomical. And I think all of that coming together, the numbers are off scale. Now, we could also argue the point that access to services has been better than it's ever been, in terms of families knowing where to go, GPs having the opportunity to signpost to more services. But then the counter argument to that is, are the services in a position to be able to support these young children? I'm not sure they are. But so rather long-windedly, and I promised I wouldn't talk too long, the answer to your question is yes, numbers of children have rocketed.
Yeah. And we were sharing that we were both chatterboxes, and this is only 15 minutes long, so I'm going to try and rein James in this conversation. I think when we emailed before this to talk about I guess, a bit of what we wanted to cover today. I think we could dwell a lot on numbers and services. And I think what I'm hoping people get more from these conversations is takeaway messages and things that they can be doing. So maybe we can kind of steer over to that and try and get some helpful points across, because we want people to have something that they can take away. So certainly in my post this week, I've been going down kind of trying to share information around behavioural activation, because one of the things that I hear a lot from parents and people who are presenting to me is this stage where kids are isolating themselves, taking themselves off to the bedrooms and struggling to get them to do anything. And I'm not sure whether I've been asked questions for this conversation as well around that, about whether there's any advice that we can share for the adolescents themselves who might sit down and watch this, or for parents of children of that kind of age group, about how we kind of get kids moving out of that circle of just hiding away in their bedrooms and just not able to do the things that we know that might make them feel better. Have you got anything you would like to share for that kind of group? Because I think that's a massive.
Yeah. Well, I think we're seeing that those symptoms present and those behaviours present more and more. Now, if we look at it from if we look at it from a psychological perspective, the behaviours that the children are exhibiting, I would argue, are perfectly normal and natural. Now, bear with me. The reason that regressive behaviour, or that retreat into safety, is a clear representation of an overwhelmed mind. So the outside world is becoming too much. Now, if we throw in, as we said before, all of the contributing factors that feed into this, the behaviour of the child is exhibiting a need to retreat, to disconnect, to alleviate the pressures of the world. Now, often I'll speak to parents, but equally share this with children, older children, early adolescents and late adolescents, is that we're a closed system. As a species, we're a closed system. We want to keep the outside out and the inside in. Physically, we're very good at it. If we fall over, you will know better than most as a doctor, and we open a wound, we want to triage it and corrupting it. Now, physically, we're very, very good at it. Emotionally, we're not so much. In our defense, there's an awful lot of information that kind of floods and flows into the system. As I said before, over the last 20 or 30 years, from a technological perspective, the social demands and increases, it's huge. So what our children are faced with at the minute is this significant influx in demand. Now, if you couple that with the demand that comes from the internal world, that developmental phase and that adjustment into reaching out and understanding the world a little bit more, for many, it just causes a shutdown or an implosion. Yeah. So for these children, what we're often looking at is stimulating natural coping mechanisms. Natural coping mechanisms in a form of managing discomfort. The art of being an adult, it's no secret, is learning to tolerate discomfort. There is no certainty, there's no guarantee in life. We all know this as adults. And we're working in shades of grey. It's never, ever black and white as an adult. And that's the biggest transition for children moving into adolescence and into early adulthood. The world goes from being quite black and white into shades of grey. So for these children, it's about enabling them to approach the world with a greater sense of control. Their presentation, their behaviours are exhibiting an overwhelming loss of control. So they retreat to a sense of safety, sometimes become quite nocturnal because the world's a quieter place when everyone's asleep. Or into their devices and electronics or whatever it may be. What we're looking for these children is graded exposure, exposing themselves to controlled levels of discomfort. And that's the operative word, controlled levels of discomfort in this graded approach. So we're gradually in a sort of behavioural experiment way, we're putting in place this opportunity for children to step back into the world on their terms, experience a level of discomfort, stimulate the coping mechanisms, and then come back, rest, recuperate, recalibrate, and then go again. But the narrative, externalizing that narrative, keeping an open channel of dialogue is also imperative. We must keep talking. We can't just do it from a behavioural perspective. Yeah.
I mean, I get that. It's like that kind of parents who are kind of going, how do I how do I even have those conversations? And I'll often say, just be available. Sometimes young people aren't at that point where they're able to have a conversation, but if they know that you're there, that's half the battle there almost, isn't it? And I'm interested about that graded exposure, because that's a sort of an extra step, isn't it, towards the sort of behavioral activation. I guess we're then thinking about, okay, what's an easy first step for someone to make? We kind of, if we're thinking graded, we want to go for something that maybe they always did feel safe. It's almost the last thing that dropped off, isn't it? So going back to the last thing that you stopped doing, and maybe doing it with someone else is always something that I would always think when I'm grading something.
Yeah, so I think when you've got that, for any child, well, any human being, we're social creatures. What underpins our existence is relationships. So that support of another, again, is paramount. For me, the support mechanism or the support network is crucial, but equally it's that reflective process as well. So when we look at exposure work, or we term it as behavioural experiments, they are that experiments. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is that sort of aim and hypothesis, what we think might happen. And you're right. What we want to do is pitch it at a level that is uncomfortable, but it's tolerable. That it's not to the point where it becomes almost traumatizing and unrealistic. Otherwise, we're feeding into a failure cycle. So we're pitching it at a level that is going to provoke a set of emotions that we're finding difficult to manage, but we can. I always liken it to, if we look at the region of the brain that will illuminate through emotional pain and distress, exactly the same region as physical pain and distress. So, if someone said to me, we're going to pinch your arm for 15 seconds, no one wants their arm pinched for 15 seconds. In the same way, no one wants a blood test or go to the dentist, because it's pain provoking, but it's tolerable pain. So if we can get that initial stage to be similar to that of a pinch that is of 15 seconds, we're around about the right mark. Then we execute the behavior, execute the experiment, we come back, then we reflect upon it. What did we think would happen? How difficult did we think it may be? How did we feel thereafter? That reflective stage is very, very crucial for shoring up and recalibrating the cognitive structure so that we can approach new behaviors differently. Going back to your earlier point as well, with regards to how the parents approach it, you're absolutely right. It's being available, and it's consistency. Society has conditioned us and molded us into believing that we always have to be doing something. For children, they are leaving a world where they are always in the moment. They're forever being in the moment. This adjustment into a world that's a constant state of doing is what's causing a lot of trouble. I read this wonderful piece a couple of months ago, and there was this term that I thought, wow, how powerful. And it said, before COVID, we were already in a plague of productivity, and that's what it is entering again. There's always this need to be doing something or feel we should be doing something. Yeah. The last thing a child or adolescent wants is more demand placed upon their shoulders that comes from an external source. So consistency from parents, open channel of dialogue, and just being present, like you say.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've lost the ability to kind of just be a little bit, haven't we? And that kind of, I often even work with adults on that, trying to relearn how it's okay to almost switch your brain off and have that kind of headspace. I mean, that's why Headspace is a great term for that particular website. And they do have stuff on there for adolescents as well, if we're thinking about resources. Can we, and I'm throwing this at you, but I just wonder, we should probably mention it. Maybe this is a whole topic in itself, but self-harm.
Yes.
Is massive in this particular age group. And again, I was saying this pre-COVID and used to talk to my friends about the concern that I was having about adolescents, and pretty much almost every young girl who walked into my clinic was self-harming. It had become normalized. Where do we go in this very short conversation about self-harm? Have you got anything you'd throw in, or do we need to come back to it as a proper topic?
Yeah, well, it certainly warrants or deserves a conversation as a standalone topic. But as a sort of whistle-stop tour, I have a very unorthodox approach to self-harm, and in as much as and not to turn off any of your viewers, but it's probably one of the most effective coping mechanisms on the planet. Now, there are caveats, obviously, that I'm going to add to this as well. It's one of the most unhealthy and potentially dangerous as well. Now, what I mean with regards to one of the most effective, as I touched on before, with regards to that, the region of the brain that responds to physical pain and discomfort, similar region to emotional pain and discomfort, when we're existing in a world that emotionally is overwhelming and we feel as though we've lost control or we're really struggling, for many adolescents they are, the brain will instinctively seek out ways to regain a sense of control. Now, arguably, there is research that would suggest that we carry genetic predispositions to certain coping tendencies, whether it be alcoholism, drugs, self-harm, food, again, a topic for another day. But for those individuals that are utilizing self-harm as a coping mechanism, as a tool, we can stretch or elongate in that phrase to self-soothing behaviors, because effectively this is what the adolescent or child is doing. The moment they are burning, cutting, scalding, picking, in that instant, the rest of the world becomes suspended and they are in control of the pain, effectively it is, that they are inflicting on self. So that stimulation in the region of the brain that governs control releases dopamine. It then becomes highly addictive, and that becomes the tool that the individual continues to use over and over again. Now, again, as a topic, there's a lot of scary content out there. Sadly, social media can glorify it for some accounts as well. I think for parents that are alarmed, it's not being afraid to have a very open and honest conversation with their children. Don't shy away from it. Don't feel as though you'll say the wrong thing. Always lead with emotions. Emotions are subjective. They're ours. No one can dispute them. What we often do is lead with behaviours. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? If we switch that language and express how we feel, I feel really upset to see you hurt yourself in that way. I'm confused as to why you would be doing that. What it does is stimulate mirror neurons in our brain, and it loosens that connection. It makes a much more hospitable landing point between parent and child.
Yeah, that's a really great point, probably to nearly finish on. Actually, so 15 minutes goes so fast. Sorry. No, it's. I knew it was going to be a big topic, and I knew we would struggle to kind of condense it to 50 minutes. But I love that. So the conversation around this is upsetting me or this is confusing me is
feelings first.
It's less what's the word? It's less conflicting as well. So you're going to get less defensive behavior coming back from your young person, and more of an open conversation about, well, I'm feeling like this too, and that opens up a whole floodgate. And I think your thing about not being afraid to enter into that conversation is also a really big tip. And we're not belittling self-harming at all for anyone who's in that situation at all. It is horrible to see and very concerning for parents. But I guess there is this thing about trying to help that young person find a different way of creating that same kind of suspension of time and create that kind of headspace again, is the word that pops into my mind.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But that's 15 minutes is gone. I knew that would happen. I direct people to Young Minds. There's a really good website with some good resources on there. I'm happy to be contacted after this. I'm sure James is too. Is there anywhere else that you point people to for kind of resources or information?
Well, what I generally tend to tell people to do is just bang on all the doors that they can. There are amazing organisations out there, and there are amazing services, but equally some are very, very stretched. If you access a service and you can't get any leverage or move any further, just keep knocking on doors. Just search high and wide. There will be someone that will be able to support, both from a parent's perspective and a child's perspective. And as I say, that for me, that's the one bit of advice that I'll always say: just keep banging on doors.
Yeah. Oh, and the GP, I should mention GPs are worth kind of check. They sometimes know as well local services. But thanks, James, and thanks everyone for listening. As I say, it is a difficult subject, and we've maybe touched on things that might trigger for some people. So please feel free to get in touch afterwards if you've got any questions. And as I say, I might rein James in again for another session further down. He doesn't know that, but at some point we might do another one, because I think there's other things we could talk about. But thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thanks.